Hello, I'm Ryan Fox, your host here at I Hate Rock Music. And today I'm doing a video about the band Toe Fat. And Toe Fat is a real mixed bag for me. And I remember picking up both their albums and cutouts back in about 1972 or so. And they were about $1.50 each. And the covers are great, kind of weird and disgusting. And you could tell by the picture of the band on the back and the instrumentation that it was at least going to be heavy. And even back then, when I got the records home, I found the first album a little disappointing, and the second album a big improvement. But I'll get into that in a minute. So Toe Fat was around from 1969 to 1972, and a famous British crooner, Cliff Bennett, was on vocals, and he decided to get in on the heavy rock scene in 1969, and so he formed this band Toe Fat. And their name came from them sitting around at dinner, apparently one time, discussing band names, and they decided to come up with as many disgusting band names as they could, and somehow they came up with Toe Fat, which is a great name. And so anyway, the band was Cliff Bennett on vocals, Lee Kerslake on drums, Ken Hensley on guitar and keyboards, John Conus on bass, and pretty decent band. Actually, three of the members came from the band The Gods, the UK band The Gods. And so Ken Hensley, Lee Kerslake, and John Glasscock all came from the band The Gods and backed up Cliff Bennett. And there were some personnel shifts. At one point, John Glasscock came in on bass on the second record, and a guitar player named Alan Kendall was brought in. And in their last incarnation, Brian Glasscock was even brought in on drums. And strangely enough, they got picked to open the U.S. tour for Derek and the Dominos, and I'm not really sure how Derek and the Dominos crowd would have reacted to this band. They're kind of heavy, a little bit turgid, and at least evidenced by the first album, a little pedestrian. And that's my issues with Toe Fat. You can hardly resist getting the records for your collection because the covers are so cool. And the first album definitely is pretty pedestrian. There's a couple of really good tunes on it. A lot of them just aren't that convincing. They're a little too simplistic. And there's a lot of soulful background vocals that kind of give the record sort of identity crisis. But that said, it's a pretty decent album for being recorded in 1969. Apparently that album and their second album both got a lot of critical acclaim and a lot of accolades, which somehow is surprising, but they were so well received by the British music press that John Peel actually recorded their second album, and he did a great job on it. But they were signed to Regal Zonophone in the UK, and then both their albums were put out by Rare Earth Records in the US. And apparently Rare Earth was behind enough. They issued Toe Fat's first single, Just Like Me, back with Bad Side of the Moon, which is an Elton John tune, who wasn't known at that time. But they put out a picture sleeve single for the record, which wasn't that common back then. So they gave it a fair push, but both records didn't sell very well. And by 1972, they were dropped from the label and disbanded. And of course, Ken Hensley and Lee Kerslake joined Uriah Heep in 1971, and John Glasscock went on to join Jethro Tull. So they all landed on their feet. But the first album has some moments, and some of the moments with just the band and the instrumentation are pretty solid, but it just isn't really that convincing a record. As I mentioned before, it's a little pedestrian, and it's hard to believe they got a lot of critical acclaim, because by 1970, of course, Led Zeppelin was in full swing, Black Sabbath was in full swing. And there's a lot of really high standards in British heavy bands, and Toe Fat kind of wanted to be in that echelon of British heavy bands, but didn't quite cut it, at least on that first album. And then they recorded their second album, which was also released in 1970, so they followed up the first album pretty quickly. And the second album is killer. and quite a departure from the first album. The guitars are really crunching. There's some absolutely searing lead work on it. The tunes are better. The arrangements are a lot better, a little more interesting. There's one long, slow blues number that's really great, but some really, truly great UK heavy rock riffs on it, and great guitar playing, and also a lot of the addition of a lot of guitar overdubs. So there's 2 or 3 guitar overdubs on a lot of the tunes, which really helps fill out the record. And the guitar playing is much improved. It was really primitive on the first record, but the second one, it gets serious, and there are some really great guitar playing, really crunchy riffs, some great leads. And even Peter Green of Fleetwood Mac made a cameo on a song. There'll be changes on the record, so they were respected enough that somebody like Peter Green would sit in with them. And then their final single, which wasn't on either the first 2 LPs, was actually 1972, called Brand New Band, Back with Can't Live Without You, and they're more standard. I have no lineup for who was in the band by 1972, but it sounds like a different band, and so it seems to me it's a completely different lineup and a little more kind of standard British blues boogie, blues-based tunes. Not quite as rockin' or heavy, certainly, as the other stuff, but so and that was on a different label as well. So they actually existed from 1969 to 1972. And as I pointed out, the first album is nice to have in your collection. Apparently, it's collectible now. The cover's great, and there's enough good moments on it that it's worth having, but not a totally satisfying listen. But then the second album really delivers the goods. Great riffs, great guitar playing, great sound. John Peel did a great job producing it. Obviously steered them in the right direction. One of the biggest surprises is Cliff Bennett's vocals on the first album are pretty standard. You can kind of tell he came from a crooner background and had kind of a retro rock outfit called Cliff Bennett's Rousers. And he's a good British blues shouter, pretty convincing on the first record. But on the second record, he really feels at home with it, and he really delivers on the second album. It made quite a progression from the first album to the second album all the way around. So the band sounds better, the tunes are better, it's a lot heavier, lot more consistent, and Cliff Bennett's vocals are definitely far more convincing on the second record. So interesting band, a mixed bag. For collectors out there like me, you got to have both records. The first record is a decent listen, and there's some good moments on it, so it's kind of worth having. But the second album, as far as British heavy bands, I think is essential, a vast improvement, and well worth it. And for that reason, I can recommend Toe Fat, but I definitely put my money on the second record. But if you're a vinyl junkie like me, you kind of have to have both of them, and there's some worthwhile moments. And then as far as other material, there's a collection of BBC material that came out on vinyl. And so I have a couple of BBC shows to post below. And there's even a video on top of the pops, and you get to see that they look great. They look like a heavy band. So it's great to have that. And then there's a really poor sounding live show from the Capitol Theater in New York. And it shows that they were a pretty decent live band. If the sound was better, it'd probably be a lot more impressive. But you can kind of tell they're a little turgid. But Toe Fat, a band that could have been a lot better, and at their best, they're really great, but not consistent. So I recommend them with some reservations. But a nice addition to any collection, and they're definitely getting a little rarer now. And the second album is essential. If it was another band and had a different cover, it probably would be a lot more visible to people and would be getting a lot more accolades. But I still dig them. Not the greatest, but like I say, at their best, pretty great. So Toe Fat, bunch of links down below. Check them out. As I say, if you're not that impressed with the first album, check out the second one, because that's where the money shot is. So Toe Fat, awesome. I'm Brian Fox. Thanks for watching I Hate Rock Music.